Welcome to the Knowledge for Men show. Your life will never be the same.
Your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development.
I want to die empty of regret. I want to die empty of my best work. We don't understand who we are. Instead, we're living out somebody else's narrative.
What one man can do, another man can do. If it's been done, it can be done again.
Being yourself and being your truest, most authentic self in every moment. If it scares you or makes you a little afraid, do it. Follow your heart and your gut.
The first stage, I think, is finding you, like finding out who I am today.
Stuff will not work. You will have things that fail. Success is when you're a happy, fulfilled person. How do you define success?
It's your life, and you are the creator of the movie script that is your life story.
All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm here with Robb Wolf. He is a former biochemist, health expert, and author of the New York Times bestseller, The Paleo Solution, and most recently just came out with a book called Wired to Eat. He's also a consultant for the Naval Special Warfare Resiliency Program. Robb, welcome to the show.
Hey, man, huge honor to be here. Thank you.
All right, Robb. And so we start off every show with a favorite quote or like a success quote or a saying that you've lived by. So what do you got for us, and why did you choose that?
Oh, it's going to be kind of cheesy, but from Dune, Frank Herbert's Dune, which I think is one of not only the best books ever written, but definitely one of the best sci-fi novels and whatnot. But Fear is the Mind Eater is one of my favorites, because I know at the points in my life when I've been fearful of either communication or action or what have you, it's been that thing that I've needed to get through. And typically the fear was worse than the activity that I needed to embark on to get through it. So that's my possibly inspirational quote.
Fear is the mind eater?
Yeah. And it goes on beyond that, but yeah.
Okay. So how does this apply to your life? Like, how does this apply to your journey? Fear is the mind eater.
Well, if you are feeling scared about something, so let's say you have a business scenario or something like that. And, frequently we go into business with friends and colleagues, sometimes family members, and it can be the best of intentions. And people oftentimes are very talented in one area, but they may find themselves in a business scenario in which it may not well match their skill set.
Right. Yeah.
And there needs to be some hard conversations around that. And it can be scary because you're dealing with ego and implications of competency, and it could be easier in some ways it can be handled in an interesting variety of ways. One of them is because you are scared of the confrontation, or because I am scared of the confrontation, I can couch the whole thing in a very attacking, polarizing kind of format, and it's a much greater challenge to both articulate the truth as you understand it, but to also not necessarily lay blame, but to have accountability within the whole structure. And I have a really phenomenal business mentor, David Dooley, who's a dear friend, and he helped me. I've been part of a medical risk assessment program here in Reno, and I've been working on scaling elements of this. And we were looking at taking on venture capital. This thing looked phenomenal. The pro forma was beautiful. And then Dave came in. He flew in from Atlanta and sat down and looked all this stuff over and started asking some really, really hard questions. And if I lied to myself, then the pro forma continued to look really good. If I was truthful about what the concerns that Dave was bringing up, the pro forma was interesting, but it wasn't like a unicorn type opportunity. And so it really caused me to then question, is my time and effort worthwhile being invested here? And so I had a couple of different opportunities there. I could take offense to what he was saying, assume that he's saying that I wasn't competent or something like that, or I could really listen to this person who is much better at this stuff than I am and not involve my ego in a way that's going to prevent me from hearing what he had to say. But, he was brave and didn't let fear, consume him, and that it was a hard conversation. I mean, there was nothing easy about it, but he cares about me enough and he cares about the project enough that he was willing to have that conversation. And he also had faith in me that I would be mature and internalize that stuff in an effective way. And it's interesting. I thought that the whole project was going to be 100% scuttled, and it did kind of go into a maintenance mode for about 9 months, but then an opportunity opened up, and now we're reinvestigating this thing and growing it in a very different way than what we had first thought. We found kind of a market vertical that we can plug this thing into, that the incentives are well aligned. And so had I just dropped my head down and ignored this advice, I would have probably taken on $5 million of venture cap, and I would be 2 or 3 years into something that was going to hit a brick wall, and I would be attached to the front of it.
So what do we do in that moment when you said, your ego could have got involved and your fears are really starting to consume you? And what do you do to really, all right, what's really going on here? How can I turn this into a win-win scenario or get value out of this conversation rather than being very defensive or, coming off as, okay, I'm being attacked, and then you're not thinking correctly?
Oh, man, one thing, I've really worked to surround myself with people that are way more competent than myself. And that's not honestly that all that challenging of an endeavor. But, I try to surround myself with people that are better at a variety of things than I am. And then when they give me advice, I listen. So I'm also, it's kind of interesting because on the one hand, I'm trusting my own vetting of these people. It's like, okay, I've surrounded myself with people that care about me, that are knowledgeable in areas that I am not knowledgeable. And so I can relax and trust what they're telling me. Now, sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that I just 100% agree with everything. I don't just roll over on every little thing. Like if they tell me something and it just doesn't sit right, then I'll noodle on it and I'll say, hey, have you thought about this? Or, just whatever percolates up. But I guess this is a thing of there's some sort of a saying that your success is kind of driven by the 5 people that you spend the bulk of your time with.
Yeah, that Jim Rohn quote, you're the average of the 5 people you most surround yourself with.
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
It's been shared I think it's the most shared idea on this show. And I think for good reason that it does actually change your life. It does. Right. Or change your life in a negative way. If you're surrounding yourself with the wrong 5 people, it works for you and against you. You earlier said, I don't think it's that hard to understand, or you said I just surround myself with way more competent people than I am. What do you do to get into those circles? What are you doing to put yourself in environments where you are around high level men and women?
Man, that's a really good question. I mean, like my work with Naval Special Warfare. So for 7 years, I have the incredible honor of attending these pre and post deployment gigs that they do for the Navy SEALs and the boat teams and also their families. And we cover a huge number of topics ranging from financial planning to, emotional connectivity to the stuff that I end up talking about is very much, sleep, nutrition, elite performance, circadian rhythm, But the reason why I got invited to that was that a couple of these team guys had reached out to me completely. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know their background, but they were just like, hey, I'm in the military. I've had horrible sleep problems. I have these GI problems. Can you help me at all? And I've been over backwards helping them and never asked for a dime in exchange, and, checked up on them and gave them my cell phone number and went above and beyond. And it turned out that one of them was a dev group, a Team 6, top of the food chain person, and whatever.
Those are the top 10% of Navy
of
SEALs
the SEAls. Yeah,
is this special? They call it SEAL Team 6 or Dev GRU.
Right. So they said, hey, this guy's really valuable. He's helping us a ton, and so they made a recommendation to command that I get involved with this resiliency program, and ended up participating with that for a long time. So that was just doing good work. And, it's interesting because there's points in your life cycle where you clearly need to make money. You can't give everything away for free. But I see a lot of people kind of drop the ball on this, where there's circumstances where you should be charging $20,000 an hour for your time. And then there's circumstances where you should give a week of your time for free. And I don't know that I have a replicatable rubric with that, but these things like police, military, and fire. How much latitude do I have on language on the show? I forgot to ask you that. It was a little.
I mean, if you got to emphasize a point and it makes sense, but if you just can't think of the right word, then don't cuss.
Money out of the military is a shit show. The governmental stuff is just a disaster. And so pretty early on, I was like, hey, these people give a lot. Police, military, and fire give a lot. They have incredibly difficult jobs. They tend to have a remarkably shortened lifespan due to basically the diseases of civilization that we all experience, but they experience it at an accelerated rate. And that seems like a raw deal. These people put themselves in harm's way. They have greater morbidity and mortality because of the stress and sleep disturbance and everything. So I'm going to do what I can to help these folks. So when there was an opportunity to help people in these areas, I really bent over backwards to help them. And then that ended up, benefiting me down the road. And so, I was very giving in my time. And then also, luckily, the kind of methodology that I was sharing was found to be helpful for these folks. So, I don't know how much replicatable rubric type stuff there is there, but there was a passion that I had, that I just kind of drew a line in the sand, and I was like, I'm going to help as many of these people as I possibly can. And I don't really care what the personal or financial costs are within reason. I'm not going to bank myself, but
yeah, I'm getting that. First off, like, you were just doing you, like you became an expert at, the sleep, the diet, the exercise, like you were just focused on you. And then you started to add value for free to a couple guys who reached out to you. And there was you were giving without expecting anything back in return. You weren't like, oh, I'm going to give and then I'm going to follow up with this, sales pitch. But you were just genuinely giving for the fact of like just sharing your craft, these really cool things that you've discovered. And then you found out that word actually spreads. And this one or a few guys who were helping, he went and started sharing the results he was getting. And then boom, this led into, you said 7 years you've been working with the Naval Special Warfare. And then from that, has that branched into other military sort of gigs?
It has a lot, but it became a deal because I do have limited time, and because those gigs generally either do not pay or do not pay particularly well. I have to limit that. And so I've mainly focused on kind of the special operations community. And part of that too is that those guys are just super motivated. Like, they tackle it like the best elements of a professional athlete, in that they know that their physicality and their cognitive function is the way that they do their job. And they will do anything to enhance or maintain that for as long as they possibly can. So there's the gratification there that if what I'm sharing with them really works, then these guys are going to enact on it. If it's not working, they give me lots of feedback so that we can, continue to develop the methodology. So it's a really great collaborative relationship. And I have done work with other elements of the military, and there are always wonderful people, but the degree of buy-in was typically different. And so I had to kind of draw a line at that at some point. You're
finding that, you're working with the Special Forces community, and you're finding that these guys are just they listen, they take action, they want it. But some of these other groups, it's nice to know. Is that what I'm getting?
At best, yeah. Okay. And oftentimes they're there because their CO or somebody in the command chain is geeked out on what I'm offering. And so they're basically obligated to show up. And I'm a reasonably entertaining presenter, and I'm an affable person. And I care about people. Like, I think that even the most arms crossed group of like curmudgeons are kind of like, okay, this guy's not a complete jerk. Like, he's given, like, so I'm usually able to get some buy-in, but it's just different with the team guys. Yeah.
There's a higher level of commitment, it sounds like. I think this applies to anyone. Like, if I take your story here, if we take just any guy listening, like, if you're really committed to improving your health or your relationship or your business, like level 10 commitment, like you are going to commit, like this is what you're going to focus on, chances are you're going to see a lot higher results versus if you just feel like you have to do it. Like I know I should go to the gym. I know I should eat healthy. I'll do it every now and then. I know I should, try and increase my income, but I'm
taking no steps towards it. Yeah.
I think that's just a part of being a strong, grounded man, is just knowing what you're committed to and being committed to what you say, being in integrity with your commitments. And I think those team guys are in a lot of integrity with their commitment to their team. Like, they're putting themselves in harm's way more frequently than perhaps other branch it or service groups within the military. But I think it applies to anyone. Commitment.
For sure. Yeah. And there's just something that following through on one's commitments, it's a really liberating experience. Like, there's just I don't know if you get a little dopamine hit from doing that stuff, but when you kind of welch out on a commitment, I think that it's kind of a a wah. There's something internally that just took you down a couple of pegs in your own estimation, and possibly in like the universal estimation. And when you follow through on those commitments, there's some sort of a virtuous cycle to that.
Like
and
it stacks, like your commitments start stacking. And when you say you're going to do something again, you're going to do it.
Right.
You have a history of doing it. And then I think it could also, I guess, downward spiral if you are someone who does not, you're not integrity to what you say you're going to do. And then it's easier to give yourself excuses and stories about why I can't do something.
Right. And I will share one area where I was not effective with that in the beginning, which was over obligating myself. And so I overestimated what I could follow through on, what I could
so that
supply. And so you desperately, like for me, I desperately want to help people. I love doing that. I love making money. Like that's great. But when you have somebody tell you that what you've shared with them is dramatically improve their life or like your family's life or something like that, like that's just huge.
Right.
So you want to help as many people as you can, but at the same time, you've got limited time, limited resources. And so it did take me a while to learn when to say no and to say, this is what I can get done. Like, this is what I can accomplish. And, doing some things like writing books and doing podcasts like what you're doing, then you can expand that reach. Yeah. And hopefully you get as much of the methodology out there as you can so that then people can get 80 or 90% of the story down. And then if they need a tune-up or a quick consult, or like if you meet them in an airport or something, they've been prepped. Like they've got most of the background and they can give you a quick rundown and you're like, hey man, try XYZ. And then they can act on it, follow up with you. And then you can kind of move them forward that way.
Yeah. I think especially in the space that you're in with health, where you're helping people, optimize their energy, their health, reduce pain, reducing a lot of chronic illnesses or eliminating. It's like you have this skill set. It's like, you want to help, but you also, it took you, is it safe to say decades or over a decade to learn what you learned, and you had to pay for that. And there was this journey that you had to go on to learn what you learned, which is worth something.
I'm 20 years into this gig. Yeah.
Oh, you're 20 years into it. Well, you look young. I mean, see your photos. I'm like, is this guy 30 or okay? Well, you look young.
I'm 45. This kind of low carb paleo gig.
Shit. Yeah, you don't look 45, and it's a big testament to you and the work you've done to eat healthy, exercise, and you think you look great. So it brings me back to this point, which is, how do you differentiate between helping someone for free versus paid? Like, what is a trigger in your mind when you decide, oh man, I really want to help this person, but I also do have a family?
Well, so I do some corporate gigs. If I've spoke at Twitter and Square and Microsoft and stuff like that, and
they get charged.
I shiv those people. Yeah, like they give and give.
Shiv. I've never. What do you mean shiv?
Like a prison shank, like it's a sharpened blade that goes into the liver. Yeah, like I bleed them dry. So.
If anyone's listening from Microsoft, they're like, all right, Rob, we're watching out for this guy.
Well,
he's charging full price.
No, but I deliver on it too. Like the stuff that they want me to provide. Like and this was a really interesting thing, just as some background. So I was a biochemist by training, got out of biotech, got into this kind of health coaching gig. I had a really significant health crisis, and it was fixing this health crisis that got this whole paleo diet, evolutionary medicine thing on my radar. And then I have always liked exercise and physical training. And around 2000, 2001, I found this wacky workout online called CrossFit. Yeah. And my buddy, Dave Warner, who is a former Team 3 guy, SEAL Team 3, he and I started working out together up in Seattle. And we just loved it. It was fun stuff. And before we knew it, we had about 15 people that we were training out of his garage. And we were like, hey, we should open a gym and we should call it CrossFit. And so I wrote a letter to the Glassmans, an email, and said, we're training people. We want to open a gym. We want to call it CrossFit. Can we do that? And they were, yes, go, be, achieve, do it. So I co-founded the first and fourth CrossFit affiliate gyms in the world.
Wow.
That experience, the experience of doing that was amazing. But the first 2 years of opening the gym, And now as a research biochemist, you don't make a ton of money, but you make a decent, professional wage and all that. The first 2 years of running the gym, I had no idea what I was doing. And my wife, my girlfriend at the time, I still cannot believe she linked wagons with me. We made less than $9,000 a year for the first 2 years of running the gym.
$9,000. I'm pretty sure this is below the.
It is way below the poverty line. Yeah. I think poverty level is like $16,000 or $18,000 a year or something. But every nickel, like we had a terrible 400 square foot apartment. We had 2 beater cars that still ran, but were in, pretty piss poor shape.
Was your wife on board with this, or was she like
on board.
Was she like a CrossFit girl? Was she in there too, or was she kind of like, what are you doing with tires and hammers?
She was totally on board. She's actually the legit athlete in the family. Like she did compete in the CrossFit Games early on. She was like a 17th place finisher, and she was pretty high. A decently high volleyball player. She's 5'7", 5'8", so not super tall, but real athletic and just hard worker. Like she can suffer and grind. And, she just believed in this stuff. She believed in me, and we just kept chipping away at it. But it was a weird experience for me because it was so hard getting the business going. That then when it did start going and we were in a position to start asking what we were worth, it was weird because now I can make more in an hour than what I made in a year then. And that's
pretty cool. Congratulations.
It's super cool. And it's also one of those kind of wacky experiences. But, I'll throw one other thing out there with that. When we were building this gym, it was during the real estate run up.
Okay.
And we had 2008, we ran right up through that, and we had clients that were rolling in money. They would go to, this was in Chico, California, and they would go do $20,000 wine country events and stuff like that. And, we're rubbing nickels and dimes together to just figure out what our systems were. And it's just huge props to my wife. She's the one that really developed the back end business systems that made not only our gym, but lots of other gyms successful. She wrote this whole curriculum up called the On-Ramp program, and we gave it away for free to try to help other people run their gyms better. But we watch these folks, and I'm kind of a student of economics. I kind of like Austrian econ. I'm kind of libertarian minded and everything. And I was watching this run up, and I'm like, man, this just walks like a bubble and quacks like a bubble. And, there's going to be some big reset there. And we saw folks that were making huge amounts of money that just when the money slowed down, it wasn't the same rate of increase. They started losing their lives. And this was even before we started seeing contraction. And so even though I make a pretty darn good living now, I drive a 2007 Subaru Forester. It's the ultimate lesbian dream vehicle, and I will drive. I'm going to drive that thing until the wheels fall off of it. And this was one of the things that, like, if my lifestyle changed such that, I had to go collect cans, or I had to go work in a veterinary clinical lab using my biochemistry experience, it wouldn't change our lifestyle at all. And so one thing that I've definitely done is I've set continually larger income goals while not changing the baseline of my existence at all.
So your net income is increasing, but your total expenses is staying the same. So
or going down.
I think that's or going down. I think that is the challenge, where if someone's income increases, they get a raise, their business does well, their expenses also increase. So they're constantly stuck in this sort of, I guess you would call this the rat race, where you're constantly just, income goes up, expenses go up. So you need to make more, and then income goes up, expenses goes up, and you're stuck, and you're not really getting free, which I think is what we all want is freedom. You're choose who we want to work with and fire clients if we don't want to work with them or whatever. Go on vacation when you'd like to. But I'm curious. Well, one, I want to say, I think in your story about the CrossFit, I think that's the importance of finding the right partner. I mean, it sounds like she totally supported you. Sounds like she was right there by your side. I'm sure there were difficult times, but it sounds like the values that you guys had were in alignment, which I think allowed for that to happen. I think a lot of guys, if you're with the wrong partner and you're trying to do something as audacious as that and make $9,000 a year, it can be a very serious problem for some couples, but it looks like you had the right partner. I want to acknowledge that.
the thing going for me is she was kind of an athlete, but also a little bit of a dirt worshipping hippie also. So, I mean, there were some...
That's a great combination for 9K a year. But I still want to say, even though you have the right partner and you guys are working really hard, and what kept you going? What do you think was that underlying drive? What was it? You were a biochemist before, right? You said you're making... So that tells me highly educated. You can probably go somewhere and get a job and, eat not out of mac and cheese boxes and sardines and tuna cans, So what kept you going? I'm always curious in that, and anyone's journey.
And so it's kind of wacky, but both of my parents had significant health problems. I had a girlfriend at the age of 16, actually from 14 to 16, she developed a brain tumor and ultimately died from it. It was a glioblastoma, and this is a variety of brain tumor that we now pretty clearly understand is highly amenable to ketogenic diets, these super low carb diets, particularly if you use them in conjunction with conventional therapy. And so there was that, and running across a lot of people that had really significant health problems that I knew that there was a solution that the mainstream was not offering, like these GI problems, these autoimmune problems, in particular, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis. Conventional therapy sucks for dealing with them. It just absolutely does nothing good. Mm-hmm. The downsides, the side effects of the drugs are oftentimes worse than the disease itself. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of scenario oftentimes. And I just knew that there was huge efficacy in this methodology. And then to say nothing of just, people that were overweight and were going to have a heart attack or develop type 2 diabetes, these things are eminently reversible. Like, you just need to get people moving. You usually need to reduce the glycemic load of their diet. You need to improve their sleep. And then you can take someone that was pre-diabetic and they were going to die young and give them a completely different life. They will give themselves a completely different life. And that's what motivated me. And it sounds kind of weird, but it was almost this thing where if I had this knowledge and I didn't do anything with it, what type of an asshole am I? It's like, because I bump into people all the time. And then you get into a tricky scenario where you end up being the Amway salesman, where every person you bump into, you're like, hey man, I've got the goods for you, and you sound like a nutcase. And so there's some balance that needs to be had with that. But, I just couldn't. I'm always fighting for the underdog. I can't abide a scenario where I know that people are being underserved or under cared for when there are simple solutions. Not everybody's going to buy in. Not everybody is willing to change diet and lifestyle, and I get that. But for the millions of people who are willing to do that, but they just haven't heard the message, they don't have a healthcare provider that's willing to articulate it, or a coach, whether that's a life coach or a gym coach or what have you. This methodology is not crazy complex. It's really rather simple when you get people implementing it. So really the thing that kept me motivated was I love the topic. I'm always learning something new. And then I also knew that if I was effective in the way that I communicated this stuff, it would save people's lives. And it has. The testimonials that I've received are worthy of cutting the hottest onion you've ever cut. Like, it'll tear you up sometimes.
I've never heard it phrased that way. But so what kept you going was that you genuinely wanted to help others. As I remember, you were in pain. You went on a journey, you discovered how to relieve or eliminate that pain, and then now you were passing it on to help others.
Doing my best to,
doing your best, and you're getting great results doing so. And okay, so that is what kept you going. Now, what is the main driver today, onwards? Because you started with Paleo Solution. That was a huge thing, I think, back in 2010, helping people understand we got to go back to our natural Paleolithic diet. Oh, this is what our ancestors ate. And I think that was very kind of transformative for a lot of people to hear. It makes sense. And now you came out with a book called Wired to Eat. What is the main premise of this book? I mean, doesn't that just make sense? We're wired to eat. We all know that we should eat. What's kind of the groundbreaking message in this book?
Yeah. It's funny, writing books is a little bit like having kids, where when you have one kid, you're like, good God, never again. Like, that was a horrible idea. And then a little bit of time goes by and some amnesia sets in and you're like, oh, it was kind of fun. They were cute. The poop wasn't that bad. The sleep disturbance wasn't that bad. And then you get back in the thick of it and you're like, oh yeah, I'm an idiot. But that paleo template is incredibly powerful. With the reason why I'm linked up with the outfit that I am here in Reno, it's a clinic that when I arrived here 6 years ago, they were just wrapping up a 2-year pilot study with the Reno Police, Reno Fire Department. They found 35 people that were at high risk for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. They got these people on a paleo diet, modified their sleep and exercise as best they could. And based off the changes in their blood work and their health risk assessment numbers, it's estimated that they saved the city of Reno, with the pilot study alone, about $22 million prorated over 10 years with a 33-to-1 return on investment.
Wow.
So this was pretty big. I'm kind of like, people will throw all kinds of slings and arrows at the paleo diet concept. And I'm always like, give me a breakdown on all the human trials to date. And inevitably you get this blank stare and it's like, well, I thought it was just made up stuff. And it's like, well, get back to me after you read the research. But, there are some challenging features to it, not the least of which is the whole, like caveman motif and loincloths and all that. But again, there's something really powerful there. But I was thinking about how can I articulate this story in a different way? And I'm on a couple of different research committees where we share papers that we get and we'll discuss them. And about 3.5 years ago, I guess, a paper that was talking about human brain development got into my inbox, and it was amazing. It really tackled this whole story from the neuroregulation of appetite. It looked at the way that we and all other organisms evolved on the planet if you move to get your food. And it's basically this accounting problem. It's called optimum foraging strategy. You need to eat more calories and get more nutrition than what you burn obtaining it, or you're going to die. And the financial analogy is if you spend more money than you make, you're going to be bankrupt. If you are a bear living in the wild and you burn more calories than what you take in over an extended period of time, you're going to die. And this whole process of eating the right amount and not too much to support activity and health and whatnot is really a tightly controlled evolutionary process. And again, it's kind of driven by the brain and our sense of hunger and satiety. And the way our world is set up today with disturbed sleep, sedentism, and these foods that have basically been engineered to bypass the neuroregulation of appetite. Do you know the Lay's potato chip tagline? Do you remember that?
No, what is it?
Bet you can't eat just one.
Oh, okay.
And dude, I'll take that bet all day long. Like there's been a lot of money spent by food scientists figuring out how to make these things, amazing palate experience, and they basically can override our off switch. And so we live in this modern environment that is very poorly matched for the genetics that used to be a success driver for us are now potentially an impediment. And so the whole book is kind of built around helping to, I guess, diffuse the emotionality around food. If you feel like it's hard to decouple yourself from the modern industrial food system, you're right. Like, it is engineered to be about as addictive as Snapchat and cocaine. So
you're saying there are scientists in, let's say, some in the fast food industry or major like Coke or Pepsi or Frito-Lay, which are probably, one probably owns the other there, but there are scientists and engineers who work on creating foods or putting ingredients in the food that make it addictive, just like addictive as like a tobacco.
As addictive as possible. And that sounds crazy. People are like, no, that's ridiculous. But you do a little poking around, and Unilever, which is one of the largest kind of food and pharmaceutical conglomerates on the planet, in 2013, they spent $50 million researching evolutionary medicine. And they weren't researching it to try to figure out how to get people to eat a paleo diet. They were researching it to better understand the evolutionary drives that made us successful in the past, and then how can that be exploited today via processed foods, via social media, and a whole host of other elements that basically plug into that hedonic center of the brain, the ancient areas of the brain where reproduction and food are the primary drivers. And people just we're so fortunate living in the plenty that we have for most of us in Western civilization. We forget that eating is survival. And because so few of us have gone extended periods of time without food, or at least immediate, access to food, but it's as intimately tied to survival as reproduction, procreation, and just taking a breath.
Wow.
And when you think about it that way, then there is no more morality, there is no more guilt that we can apply to the situation of being stymied by dietary change, because you really can wrap your arms around the idea of, okay, we are just genetically wired for a different time, and we need what amounts to self-defense strategies to be able to navigate this modern world. And that's really what the first part of the book lays that foundation of the why, the neuroregulation of appetite and optimum foraging strategy. And the second part of the book really goes into a deep dive of how to reset that process. We use a 30-day reset, and before the reset, I have a pretty slick triage process that helps people understand where they are on the insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance spectrum. That story is really important for the way that we deal with dietary carbohydrate. People that are more insulin resistant tend to do better on a lower carb intake. People that are more insulin sensitive can usually do better on a higher carb, lower fat intake. So we help people to customize that process. And then we use this thing called the 7-day carb test to get really granular about what amounts and types of carbohydrate work best for folks. And the way that they do that is they pick a battery of carbohydrate foods they're going to test. They get an inexpensive glucometer. They eat a set amount of that carbohydrate each morning for breakfast, and we try to do it at the same time and do it in the same way so that we have some kind of replicatable elements to it. But if we keep our blood sugar within certain boundaries, then there's some great research that suggests that our gut health improves, inflammation improves, like all kinds of good things happen. And then the flip side of that is that if blood sugar gets into kind of a seesaw kind of deal, then it's really negatively impactful on health and very negative for our neuroregulation of appetite. We tend to get hungry when we suffer these blood sugar crashes, and we tend to seek out refined food. So if we can keep our blood sugars within these more tightly controlled bounds, then we tend to do really well. And the really interesting thing with that is that difference from person to person is massive. Like my wife and I just did an experiment where we each ate the same foods, the same amount, took the blood glucose levels at 2 hours after a meal. And like with white rice at 2 hours, my blood sugar was in the 180s, which is really high, like peri-diabetic type high, which I've known I just don't do that well on all that much dense carbohydrate like that. And for my wife, I think it was like 122. And she's 35 pounds lighter than I am. So just from a dilution standpoint, you could expect her to have some elevated blood glucose levels. Like if she ate a portion that was proportional to her size, it would have been even better. And, we've kind of known this observationally for a long time, but we were able to get really granular and really specific by using a $10 blood glucose meter and kind of testing this stuff out. So it's interesting. And this is also why, even though we need general heuristics to help people move in favorable directions, there's an incredible need for individualization. And that was kind of the goal of the book, is to liberate people from the kind of emotionality around food and to understand what their predicament is, and then give them a very systematic process to walk them through figuring out what amounts and types of foods are going to work best for them.
Yeah. So there's no one size fits all diet is what I'm getting from you.
Unfortunately, no. I sure wish that it was.
Just like one diet you can read and it's like, oh, that's what I'll do. And
right.
And we got to focus on eating the right amount of portions, even though we could be eating the right foods, but we got to eat the right portions for that food to be effective. I think that's something I picked up. Okay. Wow. Really good. And this book is out, Wired to Eat. And then his previous book is The Paleo Solution, a New York Times bestselling book. Congratulations on that. Let's now dive into the knowledge. I'm just going to ask you a few more rapid fire questions here, just kind of shorter, gut level responses from yourself. So are you ready for the knowledge round, Rob?
I will do my best. I'm usually not that concise, but I'll try to be.
All right. What advice would you give to someone who's feeling lost or kind of unsure about their purpose? The reason why I bring this up is because it sounds like you've been very focused and you've known that you've wanted to help people with their health, their diet, and with their exercise. And you've been dedicated to that. It sounds like almost 2 decades. I think that's led to a lot of your success. But what advice would you give to someone who hasn't found that thing that they really want to focus their time and energy on?
Man, I would encourage some volunteer work, and that volunteer work could range from like a homeless shelter, an animal shelter, disabled vets. I just signed up for this gig where I'm going to start helping people who have cancer who do not have transportation, and I'm going to start allocating 4 hours a week to driving them, dropping them off, picking them up from appointments. And I just find that a lot of people who feel like they have a ton of problems and their life is really difficult, they don't have a damn thing going on. They have confusion, which can definitely be unsettling, but you go spend a little bit of time around other beings that are legitimately suffering, that legitimately have a hard time, and you suddenly get a lot of clarity about how good your situation is. And I think once you start understanding how good your situation is and how disadvantaged many other individuals, beings, however you want to look at it, are, that can provide a lot of clarity. And so I always encourage volunteer work when people are confused about what the next step is. And it's interesting because it oftentimes doesn't lead them into like some sort of a caregiving role. Like they maybe go back to engineering school or, I don't know, a variety of things, but it's just that kind of system reset that is really powerful.
Great. What do you think is holding most men back from becoming stronger, grounded men?
Just embracing that you're actually a male and that there's a profound difference between males and females, and that's okay.
Great. And so your books here, The Paleo Solution and Wired to Eat, I want to give credit to your work here, but what have been 3 of your most influential books that have helped you on your journey?
Oh man, I've been noodling on this a bunch. There's gosh, is it bad that it's a lot of sci-fi novels?
Well, what could be some health or business or personal development books?
Business, The Long Tail was a really interesting book, and it talked about a freemium versus premium model and whatnot, and that you could be interested in the most obscure topic you could imagine, but if you get really good at it and you're a good communicator, you could probably build a good living around that. And so I really love The Long Tail. I love Blue Ocean Strategy, which is a book that illustrates a number of different businesses that grew up in what looked like what they call a red ocean, a situation where everything had become commoditized. It was incredibly competitive,
right? But
there was some little angle that somebody had that just kind of cracked it open. And Dollar Shave Club is a great example of that, where this guy just came in and just blew the doors off that. And then I guess maybe the more recently one of the really impactful books is called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel and his student Brent, who I got to meet Brent at a retreat not that long ago. And that one was really cool. And that was one that I was reading when trying to put this medical risk assessment program together and trying to figure out if we had something that could legitimately be a monopoly or if it was going to head into a monopolized space. And it was really, really helpful and a very easy read, but very heady stuff, very valuable.
Wow. That's great. Yeah. Powerful books. I've gone through some of these books, but the 0 to 1 is very good book. Closely related to that book is Abundance. That's also a great book too. That's Peter Diamandis. I have another, this is more of a scenario for you, Rob. Imagine you had 60 seconds with, let's say, 25-year-old Rob, if you can envision where he's at personally, professionally, in his relationship, and knowing what you now know today. And so if you had 60 seconds with him, what would you tell him to do? What would you tell him not to do?
Man, I would definitely tell myself to relax into the process that I'm working on. It's funny, when I was younger, the idea of 4 years spent going to university was like, God, that's just so long. But time goes by so incredibly fast, and it's going to go by fast no matter what you're doing. But if you have a goal, if you understand where you are, then you have a goal, and you spend some time retro-engineering the process to achieve that goal, not only is time going to go by, but you're also going to have achieved the things that, are going to move your life forward.
Right.
And that was a hard lesson for me to learn. And so, more patience, more diligence, definitely enjoying your life, like enjoy the moment. Don't, it can't all be work, but just realize that the time's going to go by. And so what do you want at the end of that process?
I like that a lot. And what's your philosophy on success?
I guess, try to be ethical and do the stuff that you love for the most part. That seems to be the comparative advantage these days. And also, though, keep an eye out for the reality that you could head into business with that thing that you absolutely love, and it could become the bane of your existence. So just be a little bit aware of that. You don't always, see, this is where I'm not really concise with this stuff. There are situations where your comparative advantage may be the way that you could, build a unicorn business or something like that. But then the flip side of that is sometimes your comparative advantage is your recreation, and that's okay. And so you do something that you enjoy, and it's good enough, and it pays the bills and allows you the leisure time to be able to do that thing that really is your love and your passion.
Wow. Yeah. And would you say that, is there a danger to that, or is that's 2 thumbs up, that's good to go if you are making a business out of the thing that you most enjoy, out of your recreation? Is there a dark side? Is there a dark side?
I look at it as a kind of evolutionary biologist, and there's always trade-offs. It's not a yes, it's not a no. Well, the trade-offs are that you could be so immersed in that process. So like somebody that loves Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and they open up a school, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I spend most of my time paying taxes, dealing with the city, parking, issues, and they actually have very little time to devote to coaching. And then when it comes time to coach, people are needy, and and so the thing that they love may become something that they no longer love, and they may even drop it at some point. So it's just something to be aware of. And again, like having a game plan with that, okay, I want to be successful enough so I can pay a back-end manager so that they manage all the, the stop loss and everything within the school and keep an eye on the growth vector and all that. You establish that goal so that you can mainly focus on the stuff that you're good at or that you love, which is like coaching and human interaction and all that stuff.
Yeah, that big points. Have you seen the recent movie Founder about Ray Kroc, McDonald's?
I have not. No.
It's actually really, I highly recommend for anyone who's just interested in business at all. It doesn't matter if you like McDonald's or not. They did do something that was very kind of revolutionary.
World changing. Yeah.
Yeah. It was really, because Ray Kroc did not start McDonald's. It was the McDonald's brothers. And I was, doing more research about, okay, why did they sell it to Ray Kroc? Of course, there was a lot of other things going on where he ended up getting more power in the company and ended up getting in a position where he could buy them out. And I was like, why didn't they fight for more? And I did more research and found that the McDonald's original founders were so sick and tired of paying 50%, plus in taxes and working 7 days a week, almost every day of the year. They loved their business. It was their baby, but they said they're tired of paying 50% to the government for working so hard and, pulling the impossible. And then they would get 50% of their income would be taken out.
Yeah.
And so that made it very, very seductive to sell.
Right. Whereas if they had a game plan for how to systematize things, which is what Ray clearly did, then there could have been a better exit on that.
Right. But great movie nonetheless.
Nice. I will definitely check that out.
You'll realize that Ray Kroc was quite the kind of a shady guy, but at the very smart, very driven, very motivated, and he's just like a hardcore sales guy. He just wants to do whatever it takes, even at the expense of other people and quality of the food. But anyways, there's a lot of lessons in there, and that we're concluding the knowledge around there. What are you most excited for in just in the rest of the year here? Like, what's getting you out of bed in the morning?
Oh man, it's interesting. Even though I have this new book, Wired to Eat, coming out, I'm working on a sustainability project, a book kind of focused on food production and really kind of digging deep into this story of what does a sustainable food system look like. I have 2 young daughters. Within a month, they're both going to be 3 and 5. And so I'm thinking a little legacy type stuff, like what type of world am I leaving now? And so I'm really excited about this sustainability story. It's probably going to sell about 3 copies, but it's kind of one of those things that,
No, I think there's people interested in it. Yeah,
there might be, but people get more excited over abs and Fran times than they do over the idea of grass-fed meat. But it's a hot topic, and there's a lot of political wrangling, and the low carb, sugar, fat debate. Looking back now, there's been some interesting stuff that's popped up where big business has colluded with the government to feed us a bill of goods that's made us sick and has vilified things like butter and lard and stuff like that, and has made things like high fructose corn syrup seem like good ideas. And all that story is kind of coming out. And there's really similar stuff going on around the sustainability story. Like there's this company Soylent that they're like, the sustainable future is soy protein shakes. And it's when you do this thing called a life cycle analysis, which is basically a full thermodynamic treatment on how something comes into existence, all the energetic inputs to make it, and what that implication is. And you compare that to like sunlight, grass, cows, food. It's a really interesting story. I'm not going to, force upon people what my specific thoughts are, but the goal of the book is to walk people through this kind of logic process and ask a lot of questions and just say, is the direction that we're driving public policy, governmental policy, food policies, is this really a sustainable vector? And if it's not, what are some of the implications down the road for that?
Yeah, really interesting work that you're doing there. I did want to ask too, congrats. You said you recently got your purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What would you say has been the biggest lesson that you've learned from training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Because I did do some research, and you do have a background in martial arts in the past, but Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a different type of martial art.
Yeah. I did Thai boxing a long time ago and figured out that I was better at eating punches than I was at giving them. So I kind of retired from that. But, Jiu-Jitsu is it's like 3D chess, and you get to move during the process. And so it's just really, that is my Zen activity. Like my brain goes off. I'm just in the moment. I'm in the kind of flow moment. And so it's really restorative for me in that regard, learning how to relax under pressure, understanding that there's going to be challenging days. Like I literally just got my purple belt this Saturday, and today there's some young, strong, like 2 and 3 stripe white belts, and damn, man, they were trying to take my head off at the collarbone, and it's a gut check. And you have to face fear, and you have to deal with your ego. It's like, geez, I might get tapped by a 3-stripe white belt, and I just got my purple belt, and you just have to deal with that stuff, and not be a knucklehead about it one way or the other. So it's been really valuable in that regard. And it's kind of where I get a lot of my community too, between work and family. That's my other outlet where I connect with people beyond that.
The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu attracts a wide variety of different types of men and women, but I have found that you'll get guys who are just out of college, just trying to figure out what they're going to do in their lives. And then you have guys who are well into their careers. They could be lawyers, they could be doctors, very successful men, and everything in between. It's a very interesting group of men that it attracts.
Indeed.
All right, we'll put a wrap on this show here. And Rob, I want to thank you for coming out and sharing your story, your lessons here with my community. It's been an absolute blast, rocking here on the show with you. So I just want to thank you for your time.
Hey, man, huge honor being on the show. You do a really fantastic interview. So huge honor being on.
Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast. Hundreds of interviews and millions of downloads later, we're continuing to build an international movement, and we're just getting started. So if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a helpful review in iTunes, because it really helps the podcast grow so we can impact even more men in the world who need this. Guys, this is all about living with purpose, where every day you only do things that matter to you. You wake up, live with purpose, and take massive action towards the life you want. And always remember, love the life you have while creating the life of your dreams. Go to kfmfree.com to get a surprise bonus I've made for my listeners. Again, that's kfmfree.com for something that's changed my life, and I'm offering it to you for free. Also, check out my Amazon best-selling books that I've written for you to help you crush life at kfmfree.com.
kfmauthor.com. Again, that's kfmauthor.com to see all the books I've created to help you break through in life. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, founder of KnowledgeForMen.com, and I'll see you in the next episode.